So I will tell you, I will remind you that, yes, she's from New Jersey. She worked in New York, lived in New York for many years. She worked as an editor, saw how the sausage was made, and then said, I can do that, and started selling books. She started selling media tie-in books, and then she started doing original novels. She's probably made her first mark with her paranormal investigations, and that's the name of the second series, the Retrievers series, with electricity as magic and strange things happen, and demons and fae. It's all very complicated. You should just read the book, because I'm not doing a good job. She then went on, she wrote a series, the Vine Art Trilogy, where magic is wine, or wine is magic, for which she received a Nebula nomination. More recently, she has been writing a truly wonderful series of books, some might call Weird West, that began with, boy, look, there's one here, Silver on the Road. Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Gilman.
The Devil's West series is an alternate Americana set in 1801 in a world where the Northwest, just lost. Louisiana Purchase. Thank you. I am a history major. I can remember this stuff. The Louisiana Purchase never happened, and all of that territory remained independent, wild, and slightly magical. And it is run by / controlled by / protected by an individual that is known as the Devil. And rumor has it, especially back east, that in order to survive in the territory, you have to make a deal with the Devil. This is mostly true. The trilogy follows a young woman named Isabel and her mentor Gabriel, as Isabel comes into her own magical job, if you will. But I'm not going to read from the trilogy. I am going to read from West Wind's Fool and Other Stories, which is the Devil's West story collection that came out last month. So, West Wind's Fool and Other Stories of the Devil's West. And yes, you can, as I'm reading, download it from Amazon or your retailer of choice, because I'm no fool. So the story is called Boots of Clay. It takes place in a different period of time than the trilogy, and was inspired by someone once informing me that there had been no Jews in the Old West.
Future Will Robinson.
In his dreaming, they still lived in the village he'd been born in, family to every side. And when he woke each morning, it was with the cold knowledge that all of that was gone. Gershon swung his knees over the side of his bed, feeling cool wood under his feet, the scratch of rough wool blanket under his palms. One of the other beds in the cabin was empty, the other two still holding blanket-covered lamps. I thank you, living and eternal one, who has returned my soul unto me with compassion. Blessed art thou, who hast led us from fear and into this day, this territory. He thrust his feet into boots now, rather than the shoes he had grown up with, and they made a solid, still unfamiliar noise on the doorframe. He reached up. Just died on me.
It's been coming in and out.
Okay. I know the feeling. Here we go. He reached up to touch the mezuzah as he passed, the battered tin casing, a familiar reassurance. This much they had been allowed to bring with them. Outside, the sun had risen over the treetops, filling the sky with light. He had gone to bed late, the stars thick spread overhead, and the howls of beasts in the distance, all a reminder of Hashem's glory. But the expanse of blue sky overhead always surprised him, reminding him of the vastness of this land, this strange, still strange land. The right to settle here had cost them 7 chickens, bright-eyed, brown and cream-feathered, and 2 cows born on the way from Pennsylvania, plus a bull calf come next spring in payment to the native tribe who lived here first. But the water of the creek was sweet, and the lands gentle and free from rocks. Even the forest seemed kind, although the last settlement, an hour's walk south, had warned them to use caution if they entered the woods. Their gods lived there, Isaac had repeated, when the village was only an encampment of wagons turned inward, the men sleeping outside, starting awake at ever familiar sound. And bears. I feared neither bears nor heathen gods, Jacob had returned. And the two had fallen into discourse on the nature of gods that might live in a forest, and if a correlation might be drawn between the tribes of this land and the tribes of ancient Judah, and if so, might they also be brought to understand Yahweh. Gershon had left them to it. He had no Talmudic bent, no desire for an afternoon spent negotiating arguments that had little application to the moment. And he knew of experience that they would argue the matter until they'd long ago forgotten the original question. They still, he assumed, had come to no conclusion. But in the meanwhile, the wagons were dismantled, homes built, and a village had grown. The community of Shari Tikva was now 7 months old. Through the grace of Hashem and careful planning, they had lost only one calf, and Yosef elders 3 fingers to the cold. And now the wooden slats of the wagons made a pasture fence, and the blankets rested on beds under rude but watertight roofs, made with the aid of strong-kneed people. He still had trouble thinking of this as home, but others had adjusted more easily. "Good day, Gershon," Miriam called, and he lifted a hand to acknowledge his cousin, her 2 young ones clinging to her skirts, but kept walking. His thoughts were too unsettled for prayer. They had paid everything they had to come to this land, chasing a dream. They had been warned that this was a harsh land, but how could it be harsher than what they had left? At least here they were promised there was no church, no auto da fe for those who refused to announce their faith. The territory worked on a simple principle, they had been told: give no offense. And if the wild folk of the territory were heathens who worshipped idols and animals, if the creature who kept the peace here was called the devil by those who knew no better, the unknown was better than remaining like sheep to be slaughtered by the known. Strong Need had sent his people the morning after they arrived, unable to go farther, unwilling to leave this respite of open valley and fresh water. His warriors had eyed them carefully, circling around the small clustered camp, and then disappeared, returning midday with venison and maize, skin blankets, and carved wooden toys for the children. "You run from pain," Strong Need had said. "You need run no further." They owed more than chickens and cows to their new neighbors. But how could one repay what was not a debt? The first warning had come 2 weeks before. 2 of Strongly's warriors had gone missing, their ponies returning lathered and wild-eyed. Yosef Younger, Ham, and Abner had gone with a party to search for them, but returned empty-handed without explanation. Men died, that was a fact. But to disappear in such a way? It may be that another tribe took them. Horsehair Boy had been one of the warriors to look them over that first morning, and become a regular visitor to Shar Tikva, often sitting quietly while they prayed on Sabbath, willingly fetching water or making fire as needed. The elders thought he might be willing to learn, but Gershon thought he merely found them curious, the way he might watch a new bird in the trees to better understand its song. The natives spoke of their own gods, of the winds that carried medicine, the myths they spoke of as though relatives only recently deceased. They had no interest in the prayers or beliefs of their neighbors. And yet there was a familiarity to their faith that made the folk of Shari Tikva ease their shoulders a little, speak less softly, sleep more deeply in the night. Then one of the native camp's fields was ravaged, something churning dirt, trampling the soft green sprouts, and the young woman who had been on guard against night grazers left with a headache and a lump on the back of her head. Shari Tikva's fields, smaller, closer to the homes, were left untouched, but within their walls there was murmuring, worries. They knew firsthand that this was how it began. 2 days later, an empty storage hut was torched, the thatch burning bright into the dawn. In the days after, the children of Shari Tikva were kept closer to the houses, sheltered by the young women who carried hazel staffs, thick as a thumb, in unaccustomed but determined hands. An older boy, just past his mitzvot, perched on the roof with a ram's horn to hand from sunrise to set. At night, they barred doors and waited, sleep restless, riddled with memories. And the men argued late into those nights, thoughtful but heated. "We have the right to call for aid. When we came here, we were promised that." "From the devil?" Anton scoffed, frowning his disapproval. "They call him that from ignorance," Yosef Elder said. "He is the power in this land, and we have given no offense to be at risk."
We are not at risk. Our neighbors are. It is their problem, not ours. If they are at risk, do you think we will not be soon? They have no claim on the master of the territory, and we are far from others, far from this devil. He cannot protect us from enemies at our front gate. Not in time, they meant. Not before their homes could burn, their belongings splintered and destroyed again. Everything they had built, gone. And how do you say we protect ourselves then? Prayer? Or have you some secret training with guns or knives to be our militares? They had been forbidden weapons back home, forbidden any means to defend themselves. The handful of muskets they carried along the journey were used for hunting deer now, and they had only a few bullets left. The women carried staffs, and the younger men had begun learning the bow and arrow, but they were not competent hunters yet. We must distance ourselves from the village, show that we are no danger, no risk to whoever threatened them. Abandon those who aided us, another said. This is their problem, not ours. And thus it went for nearly a week, until Erev Shabbat came, and the Rebbe placed one weathered hand on the table between them. We've eaten at their tables, slept under their roofs. They are our neighbors. Once the Rebbe spoke, discussion continued, but the matter had been decided. Shari Tikva would stand with Strong-Knees people. But how? They were farmers and scholars, not warriors. That night, Gershon had leaned back in his chair and watched the candles flicker. Miriam and her younglings and the noise of the settlement now behind Gershon, there was peace. Birds chirped and trilled overhead. The grasses sighed at his feet. The sky arched over him with the blue promise of Hashem's loving kindness. He could see Strong-Knees village in the distance, half a day's walk beyond, across the creek that served both. That peace was an illusion. 2 nights after the Rebbe's words, something destroyed the men's sweating lodge at the edge of Strong-Knees village, knocking an entire wall and half the roof down, as though a great wind had swept through, although none inside were harmed. Ham, who had a keen eye, had gone to look and found sign of metal hooks attached to the shattered remains. Not a beast then, nor an angry spirit or bitter wind, but men. And from the works of men there could be protection. Gershon had gone to sleep that night and woken with the madness of a plan. Now he touched his fingertips to his talit, feeling the fringe move gently. A prayer rose to his throat, but he stifled it, holding back the words. The creek rushed at his feet, the banks smooth with mud. It might not be enough. It would have to be enough. Shedding his jacket and his narrow-brimmed hat and placing them on the grass behind him, he rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, picked up the rough-carved wooden shovel he'd carried from the village, and began to work. It took him the rest of the day to gather the clay, mounding it in the sun to dry so he could clean it of impurities, then slaking it down again with the river water. Living water, fresh and running for this. Rainwater gathered in buckets would not do. The sons of Deer Walking appeared as though drawn to see what the white man was doing, bringing him dried grasses and dung, watching with curiosity as he blended them into the clay, nose wrinkled at the sun-warmed smell. He had been raised with books and inks, not beasts, and while it was not unpleasant, it plagued the senses. You are making a doll? The older boy soon became bored and wandered off. But the smaller son, a bright-eyed child of 7, moved closer, fascinated by the figure taking shape under Gershon's hands. A ceremony doll? Of a sort. He had visited as well, his scholar's mind always eager to learn, and had some sense of the ceremonies their people observed, with dancing and cries and bright-colored cloths. It had reminded him of Purim. You are the boy struggled to find a word in English. A mystery man? Gershon did not recognize the term, but the tone the boy used suggested meaning. I am no Hakam, he responded, not like our Rebbe. I am Maria Shalia. Shalila? A go-between, he said, his fingers deep in the sticky clay, thumbs forming eye holes in a mouth, bringing the excess clay back to form rudimentary ears. One with authority to ask for things, to arrange things. He had not asked for the role, but the weight of it had eased him in the early days of their leaving. He could bargain, negotiate, ease the way. It was not the same, but it was something. The boy scrunched his face, then nodded once with confidence behind his ears. A medicine worker. What do you do now? It needs to dry in the sun. The sun is almost gone. And so it will wait until tomorrow. And you should be getting home for your chores or else get no dinner. The boy grinned at him and took off to find his brother. Curiosity faded in the light of more immediate concerns. Alone, Gershon considered his creation. Tall as himself, which was to say not tall at all, but broader in the shoulder, with heavy hips and arms that hung graceless at its sides. The face a smear of features, the cheekbones high and wide, the ears lopsided, the mouth a shadowed, lipless hole. Gershon returned to the riverbank the next afternoon, heart in his mouth that something might have happened to the figure, that it might have cracked in the sun, or someone damaged it, beast or man. Instead, he found Dear Walking's youngest son sitting cross-legged next to it, as though playing sticks with a friend. The boy looked up when Gershon approached, sunlight finding red in the blackness of his hair, his eyes bright with anticipation. "May I watch?" He was a child. A child should not be exposed to such things. And yet he was interested and eager to learn. Gershon could not bring himself to refuse such a student. Moved back and remained silent. The clay was warm and rough-dried to the touch, giving only slightly when he pressed a thumb into it. Prying the half-dried mouth open slightly wider, Gershon reached into his pocket, took out a tightly rolled scrap of paper, carefully torn from one of the Rebbe's books, fresh letters inked in the blank space. This was no thing he should do, or reach he should not dare. And yet the Rebbe had tasked him with this, as Shaliach. He could bind others to terms, could make agreements for his people. His hand shook as he placed the tiny scroll into the figure's mouth and pressed the hole closed. "My name is Gershon ben Adar of Shaarei Tikva of the territory. I have been tasked with ensuring the protection of our synagogue from those who would harm it, and those who have given us our friendship and shelter. Adam Olam, if you find these goals to be worthy, grant life to this most humble figure of mud and dung. Ein Sof, who caused creation in your wisdom, grant spirit to this flesh, that it may protect your children, all born of Adam, though they know it not." "You give it life?" the boy asked. "Not I merely ask." The boy nodded, more serious than a grandfather. "The winds will bring it life, and it will protect us?" Horsehair Boy spoke of the winds thus as well, in terms of respect and caution. Gershon shrugged, stepping back from the figure, his fingertips touching the fringe of his talit, words of prayer gathering behind his lips. The golem's eyes remained empty, its mouth pressed shut, its limbs clay, without breath. "Your will be done," Gershon said, and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Walk me back to your village?" Because children had not been attacked did not mean they would not, but it injured the boy's pride to suggest he needed a white man's escort home. On the riverbank, the wind shifted in the grass, and two fish splashed against each other in the river. And when Gershon returned that evening to return the clay to the river, the figure was gone. That night he ate his meal with the Rebbe's family. The old man was pensive, a single lamp on the table between them, the remains of dinner cleared away, his wife, the Rebbe, had seen shushing their daughter as they moved about in the kitchen. "Why now? What here?" The Rebbe turned his hand's palm up, a familiar gesture of acceptance, resignation. "Who are we to question Hashem? Who are we not to question Hashem?" That made the Rebbe smile. And did he not answer? No, Gershon thought, looking down into his tea. Not the question I am asking. A runner came a day later, in the hour before dawn. He waited, panting slightly, while the men finished morning prayers. Unlike others, the runner did not exhibit impatience, but waited until the ritual was satisfied and the Rebbe came to speak with him. Sweep's water would show you a thing if you would come to see it. Even in a hurry, Gershon thought, they were polite. It was oddly unnerving, those used to being ordered about, forcing them to question the intent behind every request, sifting through words offered sideways to see where the sword bladed. Offer no offense, they had been told, as though their very existence had not been considered offense enough nearly 2,000 years now. We will come, the Rebbe said. By we, the Rebbe had meant Gershon, who was younger and stronger and could walk more swiftly and free of his choosing. Even so, the sun was well risen by the time they came to where Strong Knee and the medicine man, Sweep's water, stood in the debris. His ink-marked eyes narrowed, knees half bent as though caught between a crouch and rising. Behind them, a young man Gershon did not recognize waited, his eyes more lightly marked, hair clubbed back to show a scar along his neck, livid and raw. An arrow stung across flesh and half-healed. one of those restless young men proving their worth by raiding other towns. But this had been no raid. They stood on the bank above the creek, the village too quiet behind them, as though those within all held their breath. Even the dogs, raw-boned and yellow-coated, lay still outside the doorways, waiting for humans to set things right. We heard them come past moonset. Sweepswater did not rise, but he was clearly addressing the newcomers. Abner and Ham shifted uncomfortably behind him, and old Joseph coughed politely, waiting for the native to face them. Gershon did not bother. And they did this? No, but you knew that already. Sweepswater did rise and turn then. His skin was smooth, save for a cut through one eyebrow, but his hair grayed in thick streaks where it was tucked behind his ears, and the bare arm that gestured around them was corded with lean muscle and scar tissue. Gershon let his gaze follow the gesture and wished he hadn't. What they had taken for debris was bone, flesh intact save where it had been severed, more like a deer's haunch than a human limb. Once seen, it could not be unseen. Too many parts to be even 3 or 5 men. 7 at least, perhaps more. Hand gagged, bile rising and splattering on the ground as though he'd never seen dead flesh before. Abner muttered at him, shoving a kerchief at his mouth, then looked to old Joseph, whose expression had not changed. Old Joseph had been served in the army when he was young. He had seen men die before. We heard them come, and we readied our arrows and our staffs. If this was to be a raid, we'd meet it as warriors. Something acrid burned in Gershon's stomach. Your village was not harmed? None within came to harm, Strongly agreed, but his voice did not say that this was a good thing. There is blood in the bones now, the young man said, and Sweepswater shot him a glance that clearly told him he spoke out of turn. The young man did not care. Spirits linger where the bones are blooded, and we do not know their families to bind and release them. A thing destroyed them, Sweepswater said to the men of Sharatikva. You know of this thing. Gershon forced himself to look at the remains of what had been men once. I do not know for certain. He had seen nothing, could say nothing for certain. The figure had been gone, but that did not mean it walked on its own. I asked our God for aid to protect us and our neighbors. They had asked before, endlessly before, and the only answer had been in broken bones and burnt homes and suspicion in the eyes of neighbors. A muscle jerked in Sweepswater's jaw, and something in his eyes changed. Gershon did not look away. If in doing so we have given offense in some way, the air still between them. He could offer no more chickens, no more calves, reminded once again how precarious their lives were even here, forever at the mercy of those who had no reason to choose mercy. Strongly had allowed them to build here, but Gershon had done more. Would this home too be taken from them? The thing of clay-shaped, the creature of the bones and dirt. Gershon swallowed, feeling the men behind him still once again, for different reasons this time. Yes. Sweepswater studied him. You worked medicine for us. He had not. He had only petitioned Hashem, but Gershon merely nodded. What did the details matter? They had meant to help, had meant to share what little they had with those who had given them everything. He had not thought it would be unwelcome. This one was correct. The bones are blooded, and we do not know their names. Gershon heard what was said. They could not honor those who had come against them. This land was beautiful, but it was strange. The people it made were strange. And his fingers touched the fringe under his vest, his lips moving in silent prayer that he might be given better understanding. This is gratitude? Ham burst out, and Gershon turned to snap at him to be silent. But old Joseph's elbow landed in Ham's ribs first. Be silent, fool, old Joseph told him in the language they no longer used in this place. The syllables awed under the weight of open sky and heavy pine, and as though summoned by it, Gershon felt the regard of something silent, measuring and thoughtful. It watches us, Sweepswater said, and both Strongly and the young man at his side tensed. They had not felt it either. Gershon did not look at the men behind him, afraid to break Sweepswater's gaze, afraid to see what watched them from the shadows of the pines, hands wet with the blood of men. It is a guardian, Gershon said, searching for a word that would explain and finding none. It will not harm you. The other man's eyes narrowed, the dark markings around them only emphasizing its expression of not doubt, but consideration. So long as we do not harm you, to live unharmed, unmolested, unthreatened, all they had looked for coming to this new land. So many times before they had called for help and been unanswered. Here, in this place, Yahweh Hashem had answered. Gershon felt the weight of what washed on his skin, and his fingers fell away from his fringe. I think it did not see a difference between us, but there was a vast gap that all the goodwill in the world could not bridge. Sweepswater closed his eyes, his stern expression not slackening, but softening slightly, as though he also felt what Gershon felt, both the weight and the gap. In Strong Knee's face there was no suspicion, no anger, only sadness and waiting. These grounds will need be cleaned. There was a command in those words and a request, and Gershon bowed his head before them both, the acrid taste in his stomach softened by the faint mint of hope. 2 days later, Gershon returned to the creek bed. His shoulders and elbows ached, and his skin was bruised from kneeling, his tallit fringe smudged with ash and soot from the offerings they had burned. It had been a small satisfaction when he saw how certain things rested comfortably against each other as they burned, rather than knocking each other aside. Perhaps he was wishful, perhaps it was a sign. He was no mystic to tell such things, but he clung to it nonetheless. Ashes into the ground and ashes into the wind. He would not compare it to the burnt offerings made at the temple in better days of better men, and yet he could not help remember how the wind had swirled, dust sparkling in the morning light. Strong Knee's people were satisfied, Sweepswater's eyes less shadowed. But there was one thing left yet to be done, a thing only he could do. Balakai anakai yatskarita, come to the one who shaped you. He waited, and it came to him, shoulders rounded by weight, hands restless, but face implacably still, eyes dull and feet a dry shuffle. It came to him, misshapen by men's hands, but glorious within. Thank you, Gershon said, then reached into the hollow pit of a mouth and with 2 fingers removed the scrap of paper from within. The youngest son of Deer Walking found him there hours later. The boy dropped to a crouch, small hands touching the lumps of clay where they had dried and cracked on the riverbed, as though something sloughed them off on its way back to the river. They argue over the fire, the boy said, over what you did. I know. Gershon had not gone to the village. None of the Shari Tikva had, waiting once more to be welcomed before they would presume. Sweepswater spoke with the winds for 3 nights. He has never spent that long with the winds before, and when he came out, his eyes were like an eagle's. Gershon had no idea what that meant. It's gone now, isn't it? That thing you called. The clay seemed to mock him, inert in a child's hands. Yes. Many are angry. But Sweepswater said that, and he was clearly repeating words he had never heard, only fools refuse a hand that lifts them from the ground or shields them from a blow. And that this guardian, we might have needed it again. Gershon cast his eyes down, a prayer of relief releasing from his heart. Then we will ask again. The boy considered that thoughtful. And if the answer is not yes, Gershon could only shrug, helpless before the power that shaped them as the clay was helpless before him. As Adonai Hashem and the winds will it, he said. So that is from West Wind School and Other Stories, The Devil's West, which is currently only available in ebook. We will be having a print edition coming soon, but yes, you can actually, even as we speak, download it from Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, etc. That's my hard sell right there.